Welcome back. In today's video, I kind of want to go over an environment scene that I built inside of Blender. Oh my god, my chair is making weird sounds. So I made this scene inside of Blender, and as you can see, it's very moody. We got nice lighting coming through the windows and everything else is dark around it. And all the assets that I made were made inside of Blender, and some of them were made in the previous video inside 3D Code, and I just reused some of those assets. So if you haven't watched that previous video, definitely hit up here and watch that. I really go in depth on how I made some organic modeling inside of 3D Code, so definitely check that one out. Now there is a story behind me making this scene. So sometime around last year I went to Philly and I visited the Eastern State Penitentiary. Eastern State Penitentiary was once the most famous and expensive prison in the world, but stands today in ruin, a haunting world of crumbling cell blocks and empty guard towers. Its vaulted, skylit cells once held many of America's most notorious lawbreakers, including Slick Willie Sutton, I don't know how to say that word, and Scarface, El Capone. So yeah, this place was pretty famous back in the day. I didn't get a lot of time like reading the little bios of prisoners that they usually had next to each cell block, but it was also a solitary confinement. And people went crazy in that place because they would be like stuck in a little cell block, like one person for like days with no contact. Everything would be dark, like nothing. And if you guys want to look it up, definitely do it. I don't know what I'm doing. Like I'm just reading off Google whatever I can and whatever's coming up to my mind. But this place was the main inspiration for this piece right here. And if anything, I just wanted to make my own photo pack as well. Like now I have a bunch of images where I just have wall textures of just worn out wall with the plaster falling off and maybe like, and some of the parts of the wall where like the brick is showing and things like that, which I thought was pretty cool. It was an experience like coming into contact with something that's very abandoned for the first time ever. I mean, yes, you could go to Google and type images and get like some cool textures, but being there at the moment and seeing everything yourself is a different experience. So I got a lot of reference images, and I'm also going to use some of them to make my models up here. And I'm gonna go over the entire process as well. Now, before we get started, did you know that 87.6% of you are not subscribed to this channel? What's wrong with you? Just click that button. It takes like 2 seconds. Not even 2 seconds, a 0.1 millisecond. Okay, so the first thing that we're gonna do right now is that we're gonna go ahead and generate some normal maps. So I have this image of a concrete texture, and what I'm going to do is that I'm going to see if I can get some normal map information. Now the reason why I want to get a normal map is because I want light to react with my image, and I don't want to spend a lot of time doing any complex modeling where I like model out the cracks and the extrusions and everything. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go to filter, and then I'm going to scroll down to where it says 3D, and then it says generate normal map. We'll click that, we'll give it a sec, and a window should pop up. But yeah, that's what it is. And this window pops up. Normally I usually keep it on the default settings. I did mess around with the sliders a little bit, but it didn't really do anything for the most part. So if you're someone who knows a little bit more about how this filter actually works, definitely go crazy with this. But I've noticed that usually the default settings work pretty good. And once you get that figured out, then I would just go ahead and save it as a JPEG or a PNG. And then go ahead and then do this for like all of your images that you plan to use in your scene. Sometimes it's always nice to just have a collection of all these images. That way you can use them in multiple projects. The next thing that I'm going to do is that I'm going to create a plane inside of Blender, and then I'm just going to add all those image textures. I'll put my base texture, the albedo or the diffuse texture, however you want to call it. And then I'll also add my normal map to it as well. One thing to make sure to keep in mind is that with your normal map, you want to add a normal map node. And then you can add also a image mapping node to both of your images. And over here also what you can do is that you can also adjust the scaling, and if you want to rotate it, you can do that as well. For some reason I had to have 2 separate mapping nodes for this because it wasn't really working for the first one for some reason, but it's fine, it's not really a big deal. And then once you have that figured out, you can put your light next to it and see if light's actually working with it. In our case it was, which was pretty cool. Okay, and then what you want to do, you just want to repeat the steps and just make a bunch of different planes, and yeah, just this is going to be your image textures pretty much. And I would say do as many as you can, that way you can always reuse them like I mentioned earlier. But I did the same thing, and what you can also do, this is very simple. Like I just didn't do any modeling so far, but if you wanted to do any basic modeling on top of this, where you have some cracks and like rocks showing through, you can definitely do that. And the opportunities are endless here, so definitely take your time making these assets. So after I did all my walls, I ended up importing them in a different Blender scene, and I already imported my main plant fungi object inside a different file, and I just ended up using that to make my entire scene. And here I just, yeah, I just start experimenting with this, and I'll have different cubes pretty much imitating the wall, and that's where I'll like scale stuff down, you know, copy paste it, rotate it, and see what's working and what's not working. One really good way to stay on track with this is that always start small, start with simple shapes, don't go too crazy in the very beginning. And sometimes, and that's why I like these image textures, because you're keeping everything super low poly, but then you're also adding a little bit of detail here and there, so it's easy to like stay on track with it as well, to the point where, let's say if I make something and it doesn't work out, I can easily delete it and not like feel too bad about it because I didn't spend too much time modeling all this detail and cracks and whatnot. One thing that I had a little bit of issue with was with the scaling on the wall thing. UV mapping is a little bit tricky to me. I'm still trying to figure out a good way to have it where I can like adjust the scale and everything. I did have a little bit of tiling happening as well. And if you have issues with tiling, I would not worry too much about it because you can always bring it into Photoshop and you can paint on top of it or use a content aware tool and whatnot. After I had some sort of walls going on, I decided that it was time to add a cool lighting to the scene, and I was going for very moody lighting for this. So for what I did was I initially just used an HDRI, like a dark sunset, not sunset, like it was more like dawn HDRI image. And later on what I'll use a sun as well, just to kind of direct my direction of light, because I really wanted to have that nice directional light falling on the focal point. So here what I did on the ceiling, I decided to use the knife tool, and over here I'm just cutting away some parts of my model, and then I'm going to extrude it in, because the idea was that I wanted to have some pieces of wood that were going to show through this little opening. And you know, it's really cool. I really like the knife tool. You can easily just cut through your meshes, and it's amazing, especially for concept art. Now my topology is really like bad for like a game ready model, so I wouldn't, it's not the very best way when you're making game ready models, but for concept art, sure, go ahead. And so I just used another cube, stretched it out, and then I ended up using a Quixel not a mega scan, a texture from Quixel. Just a simple wooden plank texture worked pretty good with this. And you can easily import it out. If you have it connected to Blender, you can import textures inside of Blender in your file. And after I had one wood figured out, I just ended up copy pasting it. You can also use an array for this. I did not use an array. I thought it's even better if I just like duplicate it, because I don't know, at that time it's easier to have, I wanted more control over how many copies I want and how much distance I want between the logs as well. And then I'm just checking, seeing how light's working and what's not working. I feel like the one mistake that I made early on is that I should have made my entire interior first, like the walls and everything, and then I should have added lighting to it, because I wasn't really sure what kind of angle or direction I should have when I'm making this. But in the end it all worked out, so I'm not like too mad about it. And then once again, when you have the good thing about 3D code is that sometimes your models, it exports out your models into like different pieces, so you can definitely copy paste them and squash them, stretch them. You can use proportional editing as well, just to like get a lot of different variations where you can rotate it, scale it, and yeah, it's really cool. One thing I did not do though, I did not decimate my model, and that's something that I highly advise you guys do it, because sometimes if your scene gets too heavy, then it takes forever to render. In my case, it was a pretty small area, you know, it's more like a close-up shot if you think about it, and so it wasn't too bad. Like my render times were okay, and my polys were okay as well. Now if I was doing like a full-blown exterior scene, that would be a little bit more conscious about my polygon count. And my goal is, whenever I make a very high poly model, I try to recycle as many pieces as possible, you know, and it's mostly trial and error at that point. After I was done making most of it, then I decided that maybe I should change the texture on the roots. So I went to Quixel again and I found some cool looking roots that I replaced my tree roots with. Because when I was in 3D code, I didn't really add any texture to it. I just painted some colors on top of it, and it wasn't working. It looked very plastic, if that makes sense, very oily and plasticky. So I thought that'd be better if I just use a texture of some sort. But for the petals and for the fungi, I think the colors work really well. Because what texture do you even use for that kind of thing? I mean, so I just used a default texture and painted some colors on top of it. The next thing that I wanted to do is that I wanted to set dress the scene a little bit more. Now, mostly the main focal point is the roots and the fungi plant, but it's always good to have some sort of relatable thing as well. So I thought maybe this would be a good time to model out a simple looking sofa. So I started off with just some simple basic cube looking structures for the armrest, for the headrest, and for the main sitting part of the sofa, whatever the hell that's called. And then after that I added a bevel modifier to all of them. And the next thing that I did was I used some cloth simulations to make some really cool looking cushions. And I promise you there are thousands of videos out there on how to make sofas in Blender. Just watch one that you like and just follow along, because that's what I did. And it was really cool. If anything, it was a lot of fun working on this little sofa compared to everything else. Just the simulations, man, they look so satisfying when you hit the play button and it all just poofs and you see you get this nice little cushion. So I did a few more iterations on that just to kind of see which one I liked the most. And after I liked a sofa, it's not a sofa, after I like a cushion of some sort, then I ended up duplicating it and just ended up using it most for the rest of the sofa itself. And what you can also do, we want to make sure that you also have enough polys up here. So make sure you have, you either like add more edges on your own, or you can add the subdivision surface modifier or the remesh modifier and get some cool details up there. And notice how like I have my human scale next to it, because I want to make sure that everything is to scale. And even though I had the human next to me, the sofa itself still looked so big, which I will definitely scale down in a little bit later on. And yeah, after I was done modeling the sofa, I just used some basic fabric texture on it, nothing crazy, just a normal map and an albedo map on it. You can also use a reference map by using the same image texture that you used for the albedo. After that, I thought it'd be cool to just have some sort of like stool type chair next, and simple poly modeling as well, simple cylinders. I used a little bit of that cushion, and not the cushion, the armrest, and I thought that would be a cool sitting chair cushion that I can use for this. So yeah, I do recycle a lot of my pieces. You should know this by now. And then for the legs of the stool as well, I just used a cylinder, just shaped it the way I wanted to. And yeah, and honestly, I'm not spending too much time on this set dressing, right? Because that's not my main focus. If anything, I'm gonna have these two elements just on the corners of my image, and they'll probably be in shadow as well, so I'm not worried too much about it. I just want to add some more interest to this area, to this scene, so that it doesn't look like I just threw some roots here and there, because I actually did just put some roots all over the place. Honestly. And for the wood, for the legs of the stool, I ended up using a Quixel Mega Scan as well, just some wooden texture on top of it. Honestly, I could have achieved it with just using a wooden image of some sort, but it's fine, no one really cares. After I was done with the sofa and the stool, I thought it'd be cool to add some more roots to the foreground that'll lead your eye towards the main focal point. And so I was just copy pasting the roots a little bit more, rotating them, scaling them down, pushing them forward, because my main goal here is that I want to add detail, but I also don't want to make it look super noisy. And now it was working really well with my lighting, because I had everything in shadow, and the lighter part, there was a lot of rest up there. And then I thought that it'd be cool if I just have the main focal point instead the whole fungi being the focal point. How about I just like copy paste parts of it and put it in the direction of the light, and that's where you could be, that's where the main focal point could be of this image. And it was but I like this part of my personal project, because many times I'm going with the flow, and when I go with the flow, I get a lot of happy accidents, and this was one of them. Like, I did not picture having this little piece be the main focal point, but because it worked so well with the lighting that I had, I decided that, hey, I should just go with this. And at this point, honestly, I'm pretty much done for I'm almost done, I would say, with the 3D part of my image, because I'm just if you notice, literally I was just copy pasting everything, and I guess I just got lucky with this kind of piece. And sometimes you can like duplicate your parts of your mesh, and you can like delete some parts of it, and when you do that, you end up creating something new, which is really cool, and I appreciate that workflow a lot as well. And then there were these little fungi, little pollen cubes, not cubes, spheres, that I thought would add a lot of cool detail to my main focal point as well. I'm constantly thinking about the big, medium, and small shapes. If I have a big shape, I want to make sure there's always a small or a medium shape next to it, just to kind of show that variation. And then I came back to the sofa and I decided that maybe I should, start placing it in my scene. I can probably have it like tumbled over. Maybe the cushions are falling over as well. And so I'm just here checking and seeing how it would like help with my composition. And sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. In this case it did. As you can see, I put it mostly on the corners because I didn't want it to like cover the main focus of our image, which was the plant itself. And I did the same thing with the little stool also. I placed it on like different parts of my scene. And then I went back to my ceiling and I thought it'd be cool if I just cut away parts of it as well and just like extruded some parts of it inwards and add maybe like some more wooden pieces up there. Or if anything, if I did not add any wooden planks up there, maybe I would just get some cool shadows. That would probably help me. But the main goal when I was making the scene is that whenever I do stuff in 3D, I try to do everything like at least 70 to 80% in 3D, because when you're doing stuff in 3D, there's no guesswork, right? Because many times I've been in situations where I'm just like, oh, I get lazy and I'm like, okay, I'll just like photo bash this in Photoshop. But then when I get to that photo bash point, it's just so hard to find the right image, and then sometimes the perspective is off. If the perspective is right, then the lighting is off, and you get so many issues. Whereas if you just make it in 3D, you just have everything right up there. There's no guesswork at this point, at least with environments. Now, doing characters is a whole another thing, and I'm not really gonna get into it because I don't really do characters mostly. But for environments, I highly recommend that if you're doing photorealistic environments and you're going through the trouble of just making everything in 3D, just do everything in 3D. At least if you're not too comfortable doing it in Photoshop. Now, if you're someone who's a veteran in Photoshop and you know what you're doing exactly and you're really good at photo bashing, then yeah, maybe then this is not for you. You're probably a pro. And but if you're someone who struggles with that part, definitely use 3D to your advantage. And a lot of people do that. There's nothing to be ashamed of, if you're having issues with 3D, with photo bashing, just using 3D as a tool. And I was moving around the stool here and there, and I realized that the legs of the stool were getting was catching a lot of the light, and it was distracting me from the main focal point. So I ended up putting it in the shadow as well. Next, it was time to work on the window pane that was on the left, and so I did the same thing again. Just used a bunch of cubes, stretched them out, and I was looking at some reference as well. And I just wanted to have some light coming through this window, but I didn't want it to be completely like open like that. So I just wanted to make some sort of like frame or some window pane as well. And I also used the images, once again, the wall textures for this. Even though if I think about it, it wouldn't have mattered because it was so much in shadow and I think none of it would have been seen. But it was still cool to have it. And then once again, just scaling it up, scaling it down, rotating it, seeing what's working, what's not working. And I'm also constantly going back and forth with my render and with my solid viewport. Sometimes if I put it on render the entire time, it doesn't really work that well. So then I try to like go back and forth with it. And then here I thought maybe I can add some like pieces of wood that are probably like broken and covering the window or whatnot. Maybe it's showing that someone tried to like cover this piece up, but it's broken now. And I didn't really change the texture on it because in the render you could barely see the texture, so it was not worth it spending the time on that. And then moving back to the focal point, I just thought that maybe I should add some more medium shapes around the main scene, and I feel like it worked really well with that. After I was done with putting these little things here and there, I thought maybe it was time to kind of go back to the fungi and kind of spread that around everywhere. And so I started off with the roots first. I put it up there and then I copy pasted it, and I thought that'd be cool if I just had some on the sofa as well. And so here I was just literally just copy pasting it on my sofa, seeing whatever I can find a good interest. And I'm pretty much building everything for the scene. It's not like I'm taking it separately and seeing and putting it all over the place. I'm looking at my render, looking at it and seeing like how it would help with the story. Because I want to show that, okay, if it is this infected place, then maybe there's some like on the sofas and the set dressing as well. And you can also like use this setting where your model just like snaps to the cushions, and so that was pretty handy in like placing them on top of my objects. And initially I thought that maybe I can have like another shot where I'll have like someone looking through like a door or some sort, and I was just experimenting with that. But later on it wasn't really working the way I wanted it to, so I just abandoned the idea. Instead I thought it'd be cool if I just had a close-up shot of just like the main plant, and then like a more of a establishing shot with the whole scene showing like the walls and whatnot. After I was done building most of it, I decided to download a model from Mixamo, just of some guy in like an oxygen mask of some sort, just like looking at this thing, just to kind of show that, oh, this person came in here and discovered this plant, and now he's looking at it, admiring it, and he's curious to see what this thing is. So that was the main story for this, like a discovery. And this is what the render looked like so far, and I was really happy with how it was turning out. And like I said, I did everything in 3D, and then the next part in Photoshop, what I'm gonna do is mostly just like color adjust everything, look at my values again, and making sure that I can elevate this image a lot more than what it already is. Okay, so now it's time to Photoshop the Photoshop out of this image. God, I'm so funny. Anyways, so the first thing that I did was that I used some content aware on like some parts of my wall where I thought there was a little bit of tiling happening, and then over there, and then the next thing that I do is that I try to like use the levels to kind of bring back some of the details. So sometimes, because I felt like some parts of my image were a little too dark, and so this is an opportunity for me to bring back some of the darkness away and bring some more light into it, and then I can always like make a multiply layer and just with a soft round brush just darken up some parts of my image. And here I'm trying to like see if I can photo bash some roots or some sort, and it sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It's just one of those things where you're just like trying out different things. And I just want to add some painterly effect to the roots as well. And this is just one of those things where I'm just like looking at the subtleties. I'm saying like, okay, what are the little subtle things I can do? Like for the roots, I noticed that the parts of the roots were just like going through the wall, which because it was intersecting the wall. So I had to go ahead and fix that a little bit because it looked weird. And then I also reuse some of the images that I use as planes for my 3D models to see if I can bring back some of the details on the ceiling, on the walls, and things like that. And this is the part where I go at my own pace. I usually see, okay, what do I need to do to make this look better, right? And you don't want to do too much, because sometimes what happens is that if you don't really know what you're doing, sometimes you'll just end up breaking your image. And this is something that I used to do a lot in the past, where just for the sake of making it look more painterly, I would just put random brush strokes all over the place, and then I would just add like all kinds of weird colors as well, just so that I can get like this really cool painterly effect on it. But many times it did not really work the way it's supposed to. But this is the part where I'll also like see if I can use some photo textures, and sometimes I can use them as an overlay layer, or I can also just, if I'm not using it as an overlay layer, then I can just use the whole image itself. I'll end up using that for like some of the mushroom parts of this image. And it's also very important to keep checking your values for this as well. And you can use a screen layer to kind of bring some light to your image. Either a screen or sometimes color dodge works as well, pretty good. But you just gotta be aware of the fact that color dodge makes everything super bright. So if you do end up using it, just make sure you lower down your opacity a little bit. And then I found this tree that had like some sort of mushroom texture on it, which I thought would be cool if I can add that to the roots itself. And usually what I do is that I'll put the image and then I'll, warp it, distort it, scale it, and then I'll usually just mask the rest of it. Sometimes you can also merge your layers and do it, or you can just do it on separate layers. So whatever you feel comfortable doing. I feel like if you're doing it for production, you probably want to keep as many layers as possible. That way it's easier to like make those changes. And you can also, I decided to add some more atmosphere as well behind the main focal point, just so that there's a little bit of depth. And it's all about the subtleties, right? And also I'll constantly have like an image on the very top. On the very top layer, I'll have my base render, so that I can turn it on and off and see the difference between what my image looks like right now and what it used to look like before. It gives you a lot of perspective and how much you've elevated this image. But yeah, I would spend a few more minutes on this, and sometimes I'll even spend hours on this, just trying to figure out. So it's very important you have some sort of reference. I was heavily referencing a lot of the concepts for Last of Us 2 and Back 4 Blood. I feel like those played a really big part in making this image. Those are so cool. The people who work in those games are so cool. The kind of work they do, super inspirational, and this kind of stuff that I look up to a lot. So it really helped me in finding this. And once again, when you're working on a concept piece like that, it's always good to always match to your quality as well. You know, if you want to make sure you make something, if you want to work in the industry, you got to make sure your work is of the same quality of people who are already working in the industry, because then, you know, you have a higher chance of like getting hired as well. And this is more like a portfolio piece for me as well. So I was really happy to see the final result when the quality of my work looked a lot closer to a lot of pros that are already doing this kind of thing. And then I'm kind of using this grunge texture as well on the sofa. I really had a lot of fun painting some of this dirtiness in the sofa and the little stool. It made it just little brushstrokes made it part of the environment, and I was really happy with how it turned out, honestly. But yeah, so this is what we did for the next few minutes, and ta-da! Here's the final image, and I am so happy with how this turned out. You could see the light coming through the window, shining on your characters, shining on your fungi plant. There's a clear focal point, and it just makes me happy. So this is a very successful piece, and it was probably my best piece so far. And I was really happy with how this turned out, and hopefully it gives you some insight on how I make my stuff as well. And this was the second render that I did. It was more of a close-up shot. And yeah, I did the same process, photo bash it a little bit. Alright guys, so that should be all for today. Thank you so much for coming by. I appreciate every single one of you, and I still know that 87.6% of you are not subscribed yet, so definitely subscribe. Right now my schedule is every 2 weeks, and I'm gonna keep it that way because I got too much going on in my life. I work full-time, and then I also have school, and then like YouTube. It's just I don't want to kill myself. Yeah, definitely stick around, stay around. I appreciate everyone's support here. I feel like my channel has grown a lot in these past few months. I mean, I was at 75 subscribers when I first started posting back in November, and now I'm at 444, which is crazy. I mean, to me, it's crazy. So yeah, just keep at it, keep subscribing, keep liking my videos, keep drawing, keep arting, keep doing whatever the hell you're doing, and stay happy, stay healthy. I'll see you guys in the next one.